Right, it is 11 o'clock, so hopefully everybody is now in. Welcome to the Fixflo webinar for this month. We are revisiting an old friend of ours, water escape in blocks from Jaws 2, just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water. We enjoyed the first one so much, and it brought up a lot of questions. So what we're going to be looking at is how and why your building insurance rates are affected. Next slide, please, Jonty. So there are three of us. My name is Nigel Glen. I'm non-exec director of Emeria, which is the world's largest provider of residential services, mostly operating in other countries than the UK. Lindsey, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, morning. Lindsey Joseph from GBRM Solutions. We specialise in residential block inspections and risk mitigation with a particular focus on plumbing and escape of water risk.
Okay, that's very apposite. And Mr. Mayo.
Morning everyone. Rob Mayo. I'm the CEO and founder of Insurety Group. We are the leading specialist insurance broker within the leasehold sector, also TPI partner broker.
Thanks, Rob. And if we can come on to the next slide. So this disclaimer, I hate reading this out, but it has to be done. All content presented in this webinar is intended for general information purposes only and should not be considered as legal advice or official guidance. So basically, we'll help you as much as we can, but we won't take any responsibility for it. Question that everybody always asks is, how do I get involved? Please do. This is a chat between the three of us. It's going to be a bit dull if the three of us are just yakking without anything from you guys. There is a Q&A button at the bottom. Put your questions in there. During the presentation, we'll flip around. We tend to go down little rabbit holes as well. So if you've got a good question there, we'll certainly answer it. If we can't, we'll come back to you afterwards. The other thing that people always ask is this being recorded? It is. So it will be available later if you have to duck out or you want to show it to some friends afterwards or colleagues. So that will come through later. Okay. So what we're going to look at is the general overview of water escape and buildings insurance. How any tips or tricks for getting the right coverage, what you can hopefully do to help, and then we'll do the Q&As as we go through. So Rob, you and I chatted quite some time ago, and I remember you gave a presentation on insurance, and it was a big surprise to everybody in the room because insurance premiums, as we know, have been going up over the years. We can come into how much at a different time, but everybody assumed that was post-Grenfell cladding fire risk. But the slides that you showed were quite an eye-opener. And the reason to come back and revisit this is we're digging a bit more into some of the big boxes, or one of the big boxes in particular that was on there. Can I hand over to you? You've got some slides which you can talk us through. It's really what's happened and where are the problems, and then let's dig into the big box which you're going to review in a second, and get a bit more granular on it.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So I mean, for anyone sort of listening who has heard me talk at the various conferences over the last few years, you would have heard me sort of saying a fairly sweeping statement that fire has never been the risk that is burning insurers. It has always been water. And I think, although I probably wouldn't mention it in a room full of insurance companies, I think it's probably a fairly educated statement to say that actually insurers have used the events at Grenfell and the subsequent building safety crisis really as an excuse to drive premiums up for multi-occupancy buildings. But to be clear, it's because of water, not because of fire.
Was that malicious? Is that just opportunists, or is it they actually started to realise what was happening in Resi? I find it staggering that they hadn't gone into the details, but I remember you saying they're starting to look at their Resi portfolios and going, ouch.
Yeah, I mean, at the time of Grenfell, I was the director of property for one of the large insurance companies. I won't mention who. And I remember having a conversation with my CEO at the time, sort of saying to him that we really need to do a deep dive into our £700 million property book to see what we're insuring. Have we got any buildings with ACM or any other sort of substandard material on them? And his advice to me was, don't waste your time. Property is our most profitable line of business that we do. Thankfully, I didn't take his advice and I did waste my time and came to the stark realization that next to the agricultural sector, the multi-occupancy property sector was actually the second most unprofitable line of business that we did. So even motor business was more profitable than property. Now, this slide in particular...
That was your Christmas bonus gone, was it?
Well, yeah, pretty much, yeah. Yeah, three years after that, I started Insurety. So read into that what you will. But I mean, this slide in particular, and I will caveat this is our data across around about sort of 8,200 developments that we now look after. And it's pretty clear to see what the problem is. The interesting bit is that fire doesn't even make an appearance on this slide. It is on there. It's actually between water and accidental damage, but it's so small and irrelevant that it doesn't even show on the data.
Is that because it's just not frequent, but obviously when it does come up, it's horrible?
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, in the 5 years that we've been operating, touch wood, I think we've had 4 fires, the largest of which was about £1.3 million payout and was pretty devastating fire, obviously. But insurers will always look at not only the cost of claims, but also the frequency, so how often they happen. And I think that is the worrying part, is that water happens more frequently and with more severity.
Now, the phrase water encapsulates a lot of stuff. You know, it rains down from the heavens, it comes up from the rivers, it soaks up through the ground, it comes out of baths. I'm leading on to what I know is coming up next. Can we have a quick look and your thoughts on what water actually means? Because in my head, it's shower grouts.
Yeah, so I mean, we've got some later slides which I'll come on to in just a second. But water generally is any escape of water from any fixed piping, taps, shower trays, general sort of leaks, if you like, washing machines, dishwashers. But it also includes areas such as ingress, which most commonly are from either downpipes or sewage pipes, or indeed flat roof areas. So, you know, if you've got a flat roof that hasn't had a conditioning report for the last sort of 2 years, and it's, you know, the felt, for example, is degrading, you have a massive thunderstorm, water comes in, that would come under the escape of water peril on the insurance policy. So it's quite wide ranging. What some insurers have started to do is actually class certain water claims as accidental damage claims. And the reason that they do this is because all insurers that are regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, our regulator, have a responsibility to effectively even out the claims that they're experiencing. So if they've had a particularly bad year on water claims, you might find towards the end of their year that they're actually starting to tag some of those claims as accidental damage.
Why? Because surely you want to, and we'll come on with this with Lindsey later on, surely you want to know what's happened. So it's not just a bookkeeping exercise. You want to know that it's water and what can we do about it, which is kind of what we're talking about here. Why would you reclassify?
There is a lot of pressure from the FCA with regards to claims management, and the amounts of money that insurers have to keep by for certain perils and certain claims. A lot of this comes on the back of the financial crisis, which, you know, some could say the FCA were partially to blame for not regulating the banks strongly enough. But also, you might remember, Nigel, a few years ago, there was a crisis within the professional indemnity market that I know hit a lot of managing agents. And that was simply down to the PI insurers not managing their claims sufficiently. And I think probably the buildings insurance sector is teetering, I would say, on the edge of a similar sort of crisis.
Okay. Well, can we move on to what that big red splodge actually means?
Yeah, absolutely. Not a problem. Can we have the next slide, please? There we go. So again, this is our experience across my business. So in the 5 years that we've been operating, we've had just over £5.2 million worth of escape of water claims. Now, Premium wise, if we look at the same sort of period, that is across a premium, collective premium of probably somewhere around about 25 million. So it does make quite a big proportion of the premium that we're collecting. The average claim amount, unfortunately, continues to increase year on year. We're now looking at just over £13,500 as your average claim. So it's quite chunky. If you look at the average escape of water claim about 20 years ago, it was somewhere around about £2,000. So it has increased and it continues to. Unfortunately, Brexit has had an impact on that. And we did see quite a large jump immediately after Brexit, with escape of water amounts increasing further.
That's just because of exodus of skilled trades.
Yeah, it's a lack of skilled trade. You know, we saw it in the timber markets. You know, the prices of timber went through the roof, and it's the same with, you know, pretty much all building materials.
Yeah, that was Canada and Russia, wasn't it? One of them was a bit too warm, one was too cold, and they lost crops.
Yeah,
I remember talking about that. Yeah.
So you know, quite frightening figures, really, I think. And if should we go on to the next one, which sort of drills down a bit more into where they are. So we've split this out into the sort of the problem areas, if you like, or certainly the most common problem areas. We've looked at the total amount of claims over that 5-year period, but perhaps more interestingly, we've looked at which claims have happened within leaseholder occupied units and which have happened within AST occupied, so tenant occupied, where you've got a leaseholder landlord. No real surprises there. I mean, bathrooms, you know, that's one of the big areas that we're forever seeing claims. I think the biggest surprise is that actually the vast majority of those claims are coming from tenanted units. Pretty much everywhere else on there, it's fairly level between, you know, tenant and leaseholder occupied. I thought the interesting ones actually were things like guttering, and there's another one in the second slide, which was flat roof areas. The vast majority of those seem to be reported by tenants, which I thought was quite interesting, and I'm not sure really why.
Can we see the next slide, Jonty? Because there is a very interesting thing in the middle there.
Yes, and that is the scary one, I think. Now, when you drill down into that, obviously the average claim size is pretty chunky. It's well above the total average across our book of business at just under 23,000. But
what is human error?
Well, human error would be things such as leaving a bath running. Or leaving your tap running, a leak from the back of a toilet that has just been ignored and not dealt with, and it has resulted in a much larger claim than it would have done if it'd been dealt with straight away. Things like cross-threading of washing machines, where a tenant has fitted their own washing machine or dishwasher. So anything really that could have been avoided with a little bit more care. And I think, you know, the figures speak for themselves. The vast majority of those are tenanted units and tenanted, claims where tenants are in situ.
So there's a couple of things. Lindsey, from your experience, any of this a surprise? And is it just something we have to put up with as property managers, or is there actually something we can do about it?
A lot of these are preventable. And at BRM Solutions, that's exactly what we did. We use a structured plumbing assessment to identify high-risk issues like aging push fittings, underbath pipework, boiler connections, and evidence of historic leaks. When picked up early, interestingly enough, preventative repairs can be applied before the problem escalates. So this is a critical area. The key area is access. So when accessing the leaseholder's domain, being able to manage any of those elements by through the inspections, identifying pulling in the relevant plumbers, etc., to repair, and you then save a claim. And interestingly enough, we're actually seeing claims far in excess of the £13,000 as an average for water-related claims.
So how does that work? The property manager contacts yourself or firms like yourself and says, I want to do a general survey. I'll arrange access. It'll gets charged to the service charges. Can it do that?
Yeah.
What about the repairs as well? I mean, if it's my washing machine, then isn't that my problem? That can't go in the service charge, can it? And if I just say, thanks for pointing out it's cross-threaded, bite me. So what? I'm not doing anything about it. I'm a particular tenant.
There's two areas, and there are key areas. So we either continue as we are doing at the moment, which we're on the precipice of a major problem in terms of the escalation of claims, premiums, excesses, etc. Alternatively, there are certain things that we can do. The difficulty is the lack of visibility within the leaseholder's domain, where a lot of these problems are emanating from. A plumbing inspection, so what generally happens is a block manager or an RCM will contact us and say, we want you to carry out a series of inspections. We inspect every single dwelling. We check the kitchen, we check the bathroom, we check the boiler, we check the heaters. We do a full assessment. We identify any high risk areas. We pull together a report. A report actually goes to each of the leaseholders, identifying any areas that need addressing. There is a management report that gets sent to the block, which identifies all the areas. We then follow that up with each of the leaseholders to make sure that this is done. Yes, it can. The good news is it can be covered off within the service charge, because it's just like maintenance or anything else.
Okay. And from the surveys you've done so far, are you sort of saying what Rob is saying? I mean, human error, we can't stop somebody overflowing their bath. That's just something that people actually do. But
Correct.
what about the cross threads or the push fits? Where are you seeing the problems from your experience?
It's a whole variety of areas. I mean, a lot of it is sealant. So,
Mm.
the degradation of the sealant, people are not necessarily identifying that and actually managing it, and it's visiting on the property below. You've poor installation of washing machines, a slow leak that the tenant has actually missed, with the telltale signs that are clearly evident by a seasoned professional going into the property can identify those telltale signs. So there is about 80% of claims that are preventable. Yes, 20% will actually be the human error, the unforeseen situation. But by drilling down and preventing 80% of claims has got a massive impact on the reduction of claims. And we're now seeing excesses hitting 50 and 60,000, which is actually rendering leaseholders with no insurance.
And something you mentioned when we chatted about it before, something that I suppose is worries is because of that excess, you just don't hear about that anymore. So it becomes an invisible problem.
Correct. And the difficulty there that you've got is it's not recorded. And yes, a high excess will actually reduce the number of claims, but that's very, very short term. You've got to be able to understand what's going on. We've got to have that veil lifted to understand the extent of the problem. So at BRM Solutions, we don't only report claims, we actually report non-claims. That granular level of detail will identify the true risk of that block and what water strategies then have to be put in place to actually reduce and mitigate the risk.
Now, Rob, you've raised something here about it does tend to be more prevalent where you have an AST. I mean, tenants don't look after flats as well as the people who own them do. It's just a fact of life. Does that affect your premiums? If you're looking at a block of 200 people, is that a question you ask? How many of these are ASTs?
No. I mean, it's not something that we ask, because ultimately it's not a managing agent's job to know the tenure of each resident. So as soon as, if we were to make a big deal of that, we run the risk of falling into the non-disclosure category with insurers.
Yep.
So insurers don't ask it; they don't need to know. The only thing that we would disclose to insurers on the occupancy type is if there was a high degree of, say, Airbnb lets or asylum seeker properties within the site. I think just rewinding a bit and going back to the excess conversation, it's a really interesting one. And you're quite right in that having a high excess historically has been a way of keeping premiums at a reasonable level. That is not happening anymore, and insurers are becoming wise to it. We had one recently, a big site in London that had a huge problem with escape water claims, and the only way that they could get insurance was by having a £250,000 escape of water excess. Now, needless to say, they had no claims over a period of about 2 years that we've looked after it. However, at this latest renewal that happened a couple of months ago, the insurers actually asked for a list of all of the incidents that had happened below 250,000. And there was actually just over £2 million worth of incidents. So, that excess isn't protecting the client, it's protecting the insurer, and it's protecting their profits, basically. It's doing no good for the development in question.
Yeah, well, you can understand the insurer doing that, because if they say instead of 250, let's do 150, but what are we looking at, sort of thing?
Yeah.
Which makes life a little bit difficult, to put it mildly. So if I came to you with a block, what do you look at to assess whether this is going to be or what do insurers look at in terms of water? I mean, we obviously looking at cladding and all that sort of stuff. Is it just the claims history and the excess? Because then they'll have to make a balance between, well, the excess was ludicrously high, which is probably why the claims history looks quite nice.
Yeah, I mean, the excess is always the sort of the main clue as to the history of a property. If there is a large excess, there are claims. Insurers won't apply a large excess for no reason. Unfortunately, there's no way really to look at a building and say, oh, that's going to be a problem. It is all sort of garnered by the claims history. You may have a development that's had, let's say, for example, £3,000 or £4,000 escape of water claims over a 3 or 4 year period. Most people would think, well, that's not too bad. It's the insurer is still making a profit on it. The way that the insurer would look at that, and this goes back to what I said right at the beginning, that they look at frequency of claims as well as the total cost of claims. The way that the insurer would look at that is there is a big claim waiting to happen. There is an inherent issue which is causing these small leaks, and at some point in the future there will be a big water claim.
I do wonder about that. You see all of these push fits going in everywhere with little rubber seals on, and rubber will last, what, 10, 12 years?
Yeah.
So are we just waiting for all of these ye olde pipes which were copper welded together, not welded, but soldered together? Lindsey, do you come across this, that the push fits are starting to fail, or is it fairly consistent that they just keep failing at a regular level?
Yeah, they are failing. It's one of the biggest issues. And the interesting thing is the landscape is changing with the insurers. And Rob is quite right. We're actually seeing a risk adverse attitude. And so for those blocks that have historically been identified as a high claiming block, they're imposing various conditions. We've worked with a couple of blocks more recently that actually was having difficulty in sourcing insurance. And by virtue of providing the visibility in the data, and the data obviously being that much more extensive than just the claims information, we've actually enabled a cost-efficient renewal with those blocks. So the data is very, very key, and part of that is the visibility and identifying where these high risks are happening, such as the push fit, such as the detection of telltale signs when you're in the property, the sealant issues. There are a whole variety of telltale signs that you can then glean, pull all the data together, and then what you've actually got is you've got a very, very consistent approach. You've got an approach that is independent assessments, where you've got accurate, clean data that is enabling the insurer to actually hone the risk and hopefully submit premiums that are more palatable and excesses that are lower.
Are you finding that, Robbie? If I owned a block or managed a block, and I came to you and said, I've had a company like BRM come in, they've gone through every flat, and either we have or we've got a remediation plan in place to replace all of this lot, would the insurer take that into account, or is that just a bit too new for
absolutely,
them?
Absolutely. I mean, we've got a live example of it. Again, a very large block in Knightsbridge that, if you look at their claims history sort of 3, 4, 5 years ago, it was awful, but probably one of the worst that we looked after. And they employed the services of a local plumbing firm, so it wasn't BRM, but the plumber went in. I think it cost about £70 per unit. Checked all of the sort of pinch points, the normal pinch points, washing machines, dishwashers, bathrooms, sealant, you name it. And touch wood, there hasn't been a single claim for the last 3 years. So it does work. But of course, there is a cost.
Yeah, but there is preventative maintenance.
As a result, that particular site this year has got a standard escape of water excess. And the premium is probably about £125,000 less than it was 3 years ago.
Which at 70 quid a pop is pretty cheap.
Yeah.
In terms of rate of return. Because a lot of it is hidden. When I managed a block, we had as always happens, somebody went away on holiday and their hot water pipe burst. It was one of those metal braided ones. So it looked lovely. But of course, the rubber inside it had just perished. And so when they inspected it visually as an amateur, it looked absolutely fine. I must admit, I changed mine every 10 years once I learned that that's what happens with those things. And the push fits are the same. I love your phrase, by the way, Lindsey, of water visited on the flat downstairs. I've had water visited on me from the flat upstairs, and that wasn't quite the word I would have used on being visited.
It's interesting, but historically, people were prepared to accept these issues when the excess was £250, £500, etc. When you've got an excess that is 10, 20, 30, 40,000, it affects the neighbouring relations as well. So you're not just talking about the actual physical damage of the escape of water, you're actually talking about living in harmony to some degree with your neighbours. And we're actually seeing the tide turning, whereby we're teetering on a major issue with regard, because there's more and more high-rise blocks residential blocks that have gone up. Some of them, shall we say, the actual fixtures and fittings are not necessarily as they should be. You've then got the start of a claiming pattern very early on in the history. And you are having blocks being identified as a sieve.
And I think that's the worry, Lindsey, as well, is that with all other perils, you can map them, or an insurer can put a high degree of an educated guess as to what's going to happen, what's likely to happen. So, for example, we know if a block is in a flood-rated area. We know if a block is in a high crime area, or if it's in a high subsidence area. Water can happen to any block, even a brand new block that's just been handed over. they can still experience the same experience that a 300-year-old grade 2 listed block can experience. And I think that that's the worry, is that insurers can't map water, and they know it's hurting them, but they don't know necessarily where it's coming from.
And of course, oh, sorry, Lindsay.
The interesting thing is what you've got, it's a bit, dare I say, like the Titanic. Okay, you've got a block and an insurer is coming along and they're pricing the risk. However, 2/3 of that property is undisclosed, uncharted territory. So the insurers, to some extent, are going blind other than any claims history. Now, the block, the interesting problem there is that you've got a block, more often than not, the directors, the block manager, etc., etc. Again, they have got very limited visibility, right, beyond the leaseholder's threshold. The only way forward, in my opinion, and that's why we set up BRM Solutions, is to actually get the visibility. And the inherent disparate nature of the disconnect with the stakeholders involved in mid to high rise residential is actually contributing to the very issues that we're seeing at the moment. So the key areas is visibility. The block, in order to understand their risk, they have got to know the risk. They've also got to, a key area is engagement and collaboration. The stakeholders have got to come together. There has got to be more collaboration. Then the next issue is accountability. Leaseholders, they say, it's not my flat, it's not my problem. There has to be a level of accountability because it's visiting these issues on their neighbours. So all these areas, clean data, understanding the roadmap that's in front of you and the risk. These are all key components that have to be addressed in order to have a dry block and to have a block where everyone can live with the right of not being disturbed or interrupted with these events that are being visited on people.
So, Lindsay, without getting into the which tenure do we prefer argument, but the government is pushing for easier RMC enfranchisement, easier RTMs, common holds, so much more without amateur, to want a better phrase, management of the blocks. Now, but those amateurs, it's their blocks, so there is a different mentality about it. From your experience, is there any difference between professional, leaseholder versus landlord versus the RMC RTMs? Anyone is? Are you happy about that direction of the government? Let's go towards more self-management.
Even with the self-management, it's the same issue in terms of the visibility. It's the analogy of the Titanic and 2/3 is unseen. I think that is a critical factor that has to be addressed because it's not about saying, well, hold on a moment, this is my flat, this is my domain, I don't need to comply, because strip away the fixtures and fittings and the actual fabric is part of the communal and actually causing harm to other properties. So I think we have to have a change of mentality. And yes, well, no, there is no difference between blocks and the right to manage, etc., because the visibility is an inherent issue. What's also an inherent issue is that disconnect, that between the stakeholder group and the lack of collaboration. Once again, this is something that is fundamental in moving forward for risk mitigation and management. We're going to have to create a framework that actually enables all of that. And that's what we've done at BRM Solutions, because my background is risk management and also loss assessing. So those two areas of experience have really enabled me to pull together this very, very tight framework. And we believe that we can turn any block round in a very short period of time.
If you've got a, how can I put this polite? I mean, and Terence just asked a question, 99 times out of 100, this is outside the landlord's responsibility. I think of a block that I managed, and I think it was a cross-threaded washing machine, and it leaked at least twice, maybe 3 times into the flat below, and the guy wouldn't do anything about it. And then he sold the flat, forgot to mention that to the new person, who was mortified when she destroyed the flat underneath. But under the provisions of the lease, the excesses went against the general thing, so that person just couldn't give a stuff, and there was very little we could do about it. What do you do when you have somebody like that? And there are people like that who just don't care.
So it comes back to the accountability area. So what we do is we actually work in collaboration with the block, the broker, and the insurer. There are ways to get around that because it's about behaviour. So how do you make someone that doesn't care care? And I believe that that is through your purse. So a two-tier excess could actually be applied. So you actually distinguish between the compliant leaseholder, of which there is a framework that actually classifies you as a compliant leaseholder, or you are a non-compliant leaseholder. A non-compliant leaseholder is the one like you suggested, that basically does nothing, is not addressing any of the issues, is actually disregarding maintaining the integrity of the property. And as a result of that, there's leaks into the people below. You have a two-tier excess, one which is a excess, let's say £500 or whatever it is for the compliant, and for the non-compliant, maybe 5,000. Now, the granular detail of the lease does not stipulate how the excesses are applied. So there are ways to actually do that. And it's very, very interesting is when you apply something like that, you'll be amazed at how many non-compliant suddenly conform.
Okay, I'm intrigued by that, because if I was that non-compliant person and you said, right, your bit of the insurance is now 5,000, I go, okay, I'll see you on Tuesday in the FTT. Well, 6 months on Tuesday, because that's not what my lease says. I pay 1.2% of the estate charge. That's where the insurance sits.
But that doesn't include the excess. So the granular detail of the lease does not detail the excess, because the excess is a movable feast imposed by the.
I see what you mean.
Yes.
But then wouldn't that person say the excess? And this is an interesting one, actually. We went to FT to be asking how this actually works. Is the excess payable, though, by the block under the insurance policy or the individual?
That very much, I mean, the general rule of thumb that I come across in my loss assessing hat is that it tends to be from the source. Right now, how that translates if someone refuses to do, I don't know in terms of the block protocols in place. But all these elements can actually be thought through.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. The only way to make people do it is, I hate to say, through the purse. That's what everybody responds to. You know, good neighborhoods, regardless of tenure, doesn't happen. It's the purse that affects people.
Well, it's these claims that are not being that are come about as a result of a lack of maintenance through the person above. This is causing wholesale damage. And as I say, if you've got an excess of 20 or 30,000, and I've suddenly got to reinstate my property as a result of someone that is not doing anything upstairs, I'm not going to be very happy.
And also doing something. We've got some questions, by the way, which I'd like to come on to, but doing something. So if we think people live in flats, I don't know, 5 years, I think it might have tweaked out a little bit more, but you're looking at nearly a 20% refurb rate. And and we all know that when people move in, kitchens and bathrooms is the go-to to change. So you get a license to alter from the landlord if you're, actually following your lease. Hopefully a surveyor has a look at it, but you are plugging and unplugging water. I speak from personal experience. Upstairs did their stuff, and I had five visitations, to quote your phrase, over the next few months, where the guy just plugged it all in, or the contractor, and turned the water on without saying, let's test this first.
So once again, we recommend annual inspections. Through those annual inspections, we're collecting a whole level of data. Within that data, we want to know any works that's been carried out as well, right?
Yeah.
So we can actually, that level of data is a very powerful tool to be able to identify contractors that are not necessarily good. Reoccurrent problems by the same plumber that visits time and time again. So there's a whole variety of elements that you can capture that data, and that granular data, that block will then have an understanding of the contractor space around them as who is the good, the bad and the ugly.
Okay. Another, Mr. Vinnie Coleman has put one in, Rob, which is, I'll come straight to you. Other preventive mechanisms, such as technology, leak detection systems, automatic shut-off valves. Washing machines tend to have those, but the slow drift, I think, bypasses those. But I know, you can have on the mains pipe coming in, if 1,000 liters a second is suddenly disappearing through, it'll turn it off because it knows there's a major thing. What have you seen that affects premiums and is effective in, I suppose the two go together, in helping with water leaks?
Yeah, I mean, certainly those shut-off valves are excellent. And if I could have my way, every development in the country would have those fitted as standard. I mean, we've been quite proactive on some problem blocks, in so much as we've actually subsidised the fitting of these shut-off valves to just stop the leaks. Ultimately, the only way of getting insurance...
Sorry, you're talking the small ones per piece of equipment, or the big ones leading into the block?
No, so we've done both, actually, and we're currently working with a very large site in London, where we will be, the directors have effectively agreed, I think it was about a £14 million project to redo the entire block pipework. And on the back of that, we've agreed to put sensors on all of the single inlet pipes into each unit. So it's quite quite a commitment financially. I think what I was going to add as well, the good news is that the insurance market is showing signs of softening after a period of probably 7 or 8 years of quite heavy recession, premiums going up. We are starting to see premiums going down. I think the danger is for those developments that are kind of sitting on their hands, they're having water issues and they're not addressing them. The distance between a block experiencing and having a good experience of a soft market compared to that block having increasing premiums and excesses is going to get larger. And basically, I think the premium increases for blocks with water issues will get larger than they have done in the previous few years. So I suppose the message is, if the blocks want to experience a softening market, sort out the water issues.
Lindsey, Terence has asked a question, and as a property manager, it came into my mind as well. Gaining access to everyone's flats is a very short sentence, but an enormous amount of work. Now we have to be a bit careful. We can't talk numbers. We can only talk principles. But if you ask a managing agent to do that, is that considered part of the project? That arranging, because can be an enormous amount of work.
Well, once again, not necessarily in terms of from a BRM perspective, we can actually assist, because what we like to do is we like to work with the broker, the block and the insurer as well. And not necessarily, because all you need to do is, from the insurer's point of view, is to advise them whether they're compliant or non-compliant. Because the claim is then, the excess is automatically deducted at source.
Personally, I think
it's the time to get, to write to 150 people and say, will you be in next Tuesday? Because they never are.
I think I would go a stage further, and I'm going to say a fairly sweeping statement. Insurance brokers inherently are lazy. You know, they write business.
Don't be too hard on yourself, Rob.
I'd like to think we're an exception, Nigel, but you know, if you look at some of the insurance brokers that have been in the market for years, they are inherently lazy. The message and the delivery of the message to these leaseholders should be coming in written format from the insurance broker. Now, I use, you know, the hundreds of cladded buildings that we insure as a perfect example. I know we're going off maybe on a bit of a tangent here, but where you put a property manager on the front line, be it in an AGM or a directors meeting, and discussing the insurance complexities around cladded buildings, more often than not, those property managers get shot down by the directors. Where you've got a broker actually standing up and saying, this is the problem, this is what you're experiencing, and this is how to fix it. Well, certainly over 5 years and hundreds of AGMs that I've attended on behalf of our clients, you don't get challenged. And that's why I think, to sort of add on to Lindsey's part, the message needs to come from the broker to the leaseholders, not from the property manager to leaseholders.
No, I agree with that. It's a sad fact of life. We were talking, sorry, I'm slightly off piece, but we're talking to Desnes about an Ofgem about net zero, and Ofgem was saying we want the property managers to write to everybody to explain why net zero is required, and we were going, they won't believe us. It needs to come from you, and I'm sorry, that's going to cost the government / public purse. But if it came from Ofgem, they'd believe it. If the property manager said, you know, you have to put a heat pump in because net zero is a good thing, they just go, yeah, like hell, you're just doing something. There's something going on under the table. Sorry, off on the piece, but I'm agreeing with you that if you can get somebody else to come, sadly, and say this is what's happening rather than the property manager, it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
A question just to clarify, backtrack. When you said about writing, can we come next Tuesday type of thing, were you referring to the inspections?
The interior, going into people's flats to say, we need to come and have a look at your washing machine. I mean, some people you'll never get into because they don't want anybody to know that they're renting it or they're just not there or other nefarious stuff, growing a cannabis farm or something, probably not a flat. But that I remember Dame Judith Hackett saying, we're going to do fire risk assessments and we're going to extend them into every single flat. And I was going, you'll be there forever. You'll never leave that block of flats.
Interestingly enough, we've not experienced that. So out of the blocks that we've done, we get a, you know, data dump of all the contacts, etc., and we automatically contact. We've got a very, very efficient system, and
so the property manager gives you the contact details of the landlord,
of the landlord,
okay,
right, or the resident. And we then contact everyone and we ask them to book in through a portal in terms of a slot, a time slot. It's been a very, very efficient process thus far.
That's interesting. And so people aren't at work, or is it, I suppose many people work from home?
Well, some of at work, or they'll be at home that particular day, or there are some where the concierge, they'll leave the key with them. Generally speaking, there have been percentage-wise probably about 15 to 20% whereby there might have been a little bit of difficulty and trying to sort of rearrange and slot things in. But generally speaking, it's been fairly streamlined and we've not had any real issues.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm a little bit surprised about that, but I'm absolutely going to take what you said. Dan's asked a few questions, some of which we've done, about how often. He says every few years. You're saying annually. How long does one take, though? I mean, how long's a piece of string? But you go into a 2-bedroom flat with 2 bathrooms. Is that a half-hour job or 10 minutes or?
It's about half an hour to 40 minutes.
Okay.
The most important thing as well is the leaseholder is getting, because everything is documented.
Yeah.
And they're also getting images. So it's about the flat was in this condition on this particular date. And that, once again, is very important, especially when it comes to claiming and evidencing that the issue was not there beforehand. So it actually straddles a number of areas. And sealant, interestingly enough, Rob made a comment earlier about the tenant occupied versus leaseholder occupied. You know, sealants fail fairly rapidly, and that's why it's so critical to have that annual visibility to understand, because if a leak is going undetected for a period of time, that can lead to a big claim.
Yeah, we again, I just remember one which the first time I came aware of washing machines cross-threading, and it was the strangest of things, just walking past a block and second floor, I could see some icicles coming out of the side. And I was just thinking, how can water be getting out of there? And it turns out that drip, 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 almost the entire concrete floor was awash, and the floors had all warped and so forth. And people just weren't realizing why their doors were suddenly becoming a bit weird and so forth. Massive claim. I'm afraid for the property managers, we got the blame. Why didn't you spot it earlier? We're kind of going, because you wouldn't in summer, because it would just evaporate. The icicle was the only thing that led us to it, because visually everything looked absolutely tickety-boo.
And the thing is, so we all also use infrared, we use moisture. So it's not just about of what we can see and what the telltale signs are. Our inspections include that type of assessment.
That's interesting, because I talked to a drone guy about particularly water leaks through the roofs, and I assumed when they use infrared it would show the cold spots of cold water. He said, no, we do it at night because the water's warm at night, and that's where we see where the leaks are. Right, so better get through some questions. So Joe, the infamous Joe Goss, the one and only, has added a couple of comments, really. So we used to pay excess from service charge and add a line item to excess payments in some blocks if the lease allows, on the basis that's where the excess mitigation premium. So that's basically kind of what you're saying, Lindsay, but on the block, not the individual.
It's the block, definitely.
Yeah, and you're saying unless there's clear negligence and obligation to maintain the demise premises, tricky burden of proof and very time consuming. I suppose in one sense, though, if you're doing your annual inspections and you're saying, we went in a year ago and here's a photograph of the grout and it was all over the place, and Nigel has done nothing in the year since, and there's been a leak. So Nigel's the guilty party. There's your burden of proof, but again, rather tricky.
The burden of proof, we actually follow up every single, so within the flat, you get the report, we identify what needs to be done. We follow up 3 times. We want a copy of the invoice. So we want to make sure that the work is done. Once again, it's about locking down, right, all these gaps that are currently causing damage to the property.
And the leaseholder pays for the works themselves. You do the investigation. Yes. Okay. Joey has a question, one for you here, Rob. Where the policy is placed by the freeholder and not the RMC or agent, how do you engage all parties to review? Actually, Lindsay, this might be you as well. I'm sure you come across this. How do you engage the parties to review and assess the policy details, as we've been chatting and spending the time and the money? So you've got the independent freeholder. How do you get all the stakeholders, as you put it, Lindsay, together in that sort of situation?
Well, presumably there's a service charge, so someone is actually, there's some kind of mechanism in terms of the block, and there's a director of the block working on the premise that they're.
But that doesn't answer Rob's thing of, if the property manager says we need to do this, they won't believe him, whereas Rob will turn up and kind of do a town hall to the RMC leaseholders.
Yeah, I mean, on those, I think every single example, without exception, we've always worked with the board of directors, and that they've been the conduit into the individual leaseholders.
Yeah.
You know, the freeholder, we don't have anything to do with them. You know, so and you know, we kind of play them out of the equation, if that makes sense. You know, so you know, go or trying to track down the freeholder and deal with them to deliver us a message isn't going to work. Whereas working with the directors does.
I tend to agree. I mean, unless there is a particular sort of framework in place that's fairly unusual, generally you're working with the block, and they will be, you know, the kingpin to actually do that. And then providing they give us the information, we then go, you know, go to everyone. But I do stress quite strongly is if you've got a lack of engagement and accountability where people are not doing, the two-tiered excess is possibly the best way to focus people's attention.
Yeah, I'm thinking, particularly in urban areas, of course, we're finding 50, 60+% are ASTs and non-owner occupiers who, are they going to pass the message on? It's a bit of a tricky one. We've got 5 minutes left. There's two more. One's a statement. Joe, who obviously used to run a very tight, harsh regime, we asked lessees to ensure annual inspections were carried out and make sure they had proof of this! Exclamation mark. Because I want to come on in the last few minutes to what takeaways can people say about this. So Charlotte says we would still need to generate initial correspondence to provide written confirmation we can pass details on to GDPR. So I was thinking of GDPR to give you the data, Lindsay, to say, well, this is Rob Mayo in flat 5, this is his details, etc.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've got to follow the governance associated with anything like that. But providing they've got all the information, it'd be a case of, just then hopefully it'll be a case of respond if you don't want your information passed across, and then we can have the information. Again, we're not generally finding that because the majority of blocks that are having issues want these resolved.
It's in their benefit. So the question of what can people do, there's behavioral things. So if you're going to go away for extended period of time, turn your stopcock off. That might have helped a little bit on some of these things. Rob, if I come to you first, and then Lindsay, all the property managers, 100 of them also on this, anything they can go back to their desk and do today, or projects they can kick off that might help this?
I think that yes, you're never going to stop all water leaks. It's just never going to happen, unfortunately. But what you can stop is the smaller leaks that are happening that could be completely sort of removed out of the history. I think inspecting flat roof areas, that is a big one. Making sure that flat roof areas are well maintained. Most insurers now have a flat roof condition within their policies, which actually states that they've got to be inspected biannually. Making sure that during the autumn months, gutters are cleaned and any sort of leaf debris or anything like that is removed. Again, another big one. And also, I think with any blocks that are being managed that are sort of problem blocks from a water point of view, get the broker involved. The broker should be on the front line with property managers, and they should be delivering these messages, and they're not.
Rather than just being somebody you email and get a policy back from.
Well, exactly. But I think in the new world of all of the changes that are happening within the sector, we as a broker have more of a requirement from our regulator to demonstrate fair value. That sort of those fair value statements are being passed on to property managers, and they have a requirement to demonstrate fair value.
Yeah.
And how can you do that if you're not being active in solving the problem?
Okay, John T, can we? I don't know if we got the QR codes. Bring that one up. Lindsay, can I give you the last word on this? And again, I'm thinking about behaviours. As we saw, human error was a biggie. What can the property managers physically do to try and help?
Develop a water strategy. That is critical going forward. It's ensure promoting, obviously, the engagement and collaboration of everyone. And I think it's the annual inspections. Really, that is going to be the most financially viable way forward to reduce claims, excesses, and get the block to a dry and comfortable place.
Okay. And I hate to bring up the usual one, which is communication, but also from maybe the property managers. The reason your premium is, coming back to what Rob was saying, is this high is because cross-threaded washing machines have caused £1 million within the last year. Can we do something about it, please? Anyway, thank you both very much. Loads of questions from the audience, as always. And water, the bugbear of every property manager's life, isn't it? What it does and where it goes. So thank you both for your time and your trouble. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you.
See you.